Sal Brzozowski. I am an advocate for OpenAir and your MC today. I'm super excited to welcome you all here this morning to introduce the New York Carbon City Property Tax Abatement Act. This new legislation, which was introduced in January for the 2022 session, aims to accelerate the adoption of technologies that transform carbon and other greenhouse gases from pollutants into valuable products that deliver not just climate benefits, but also economic opportunities for our city. The legislation proposes a new property tax abatement that would offset a portion of the costs of adopting Carbontech solutions in New York City commercial and industrial buildings. And it is modeled after existing and very successful property tax abatements for solar, battery, and green roofs. The bill has been introduced in the New York State Legislature by State Senator Robert Jackson, representing the 31st Senate District in Manhattan, and Assemblymember Robert Carroll of the 44th Assembly District in Brooklyn. We look forward to hearing directly from both Senator Jackson and Assemblymember Carroll in just a few moments. We have a short but packed session this lovely morning, so we'll dive right in. But first, I'd like to share a quick overview of our program, plus a few housekeeping notes. So to kick things off, we will hear directly from the bill sponsors, Assemblymember Carroll and Senator Jackson. Next up, we'll have a few short statements from our Carbontech panel, which includes thought leaders from this dynamic new sector. And we will encourage all of you to check out their company websites to learn more after today's session. So then following statements from our Carbontech representatives, my OpenAir colleague, Chris Neidl, will present a short 5-minute policy brief on the legislation itself and what it proposes. Finally, we'll have a chance to hear from all of you joining us today during our Q&A session. So everyone who has registered today should have received an email including links to the legislation, a short synopsis of the bill, and other subject-related links. Registrants will also receive a recording of today's session in the coming days. During the Q&A, we ask members of the press and other attendees to use the Zoom Q&A function on the bottom of your screen to post questions, which I will then pose to our sponsors and our panel. In your questions, please state your name and affiliation. And we ask that you keep on topic and related to today's subject as best you can. And in the event that all questions cannot be answered in due time, we will make ourselves available for immediate follow-up after the session. All right, so we'll hear from each of our sponsors in turn, but first I'd like to introduce them both. So Assemblymember Robert Carroll has represented the 44th Assembly District in Brooklyn since 2017, which includes the neighborhoods of Park Slope, Windsor Terrace, and Kensington, the area where Assemblymember Carroll was born, raised, and today calls home. During his tenure in office, Assemblymember Carroll has been a highly effective champion across a range of economic, social, and environmental issues that impact the lives of everyday New Yorkers. As a member of the Assembly's Environmental Conservation Committee, Assemblymember Carroll has distinguished himself as a leading advocate for policies that support the growth of critical climate innovations, technologies, and jobs in the urban environment and beyond. His legislative successes in this area include extending the New York property tax abatement for solar in New York City and creating a new abatement for battery storage in 2019. Assemblymember Carroll was the lead sponsor for last year's Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act. This nationally recognized model policy, signed into law by Governor Hochul in December, puts the state on course to decarbonize concrete, our most common building material. Building on this success, Assemblymember Carroll has followed up this session with the Climate Forward Concrete Leadership Act, which proposes targeted incentives to accelerate innovative low-carbon alternatives in the concrete sector. Welcome, Assemblymember Carroll, and thank you for joining us this morning. Next up, we'll hear from Senator Robert Jackson. Senator Jackson has represented the Senate's 31st District in Manhattan since 2019, which stretches from Chelsea all the way up to Inwood. A native of Northern Manhattan and a lifelong champion for children and families, Senator Jackson has led a highly impactful career as a public servant and advocate. This includes leadership roles as community school board president, a role in which he successfully brought and won a lawsuit that ultimately awarded $16 billion to underfunded NYC schools. During 2 terms as a member of the New York City Council, starting in 2001, Senator Jackson continued his tireless advocacy for schools, children, and families as chair of the Education Committee. His many successes as a city council member, combined with a lifetime of achievements as a civic leader, earned Senator Jackson the honor of New Yorker of the Year by New York One. In the state Senate, Senator Jackson has focused his energy and expertise on diverse issues from public education and criminal justice reforms to tenants' rights and climate justice. He is currently the chair of the Senate's Civil Service and Pensions Committee and is a member of multiple committees related to education, economic development, and city governance. Welcome, Senator Jackson. So I'd like to pass it off to Assemblymember Carroll first.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's wonderful to be here with the OpenAir Collective and my colleague in government, Senator Jackson. I think it is imperative that we come up with creative solutions to limit our carbon footprint. And this bill does one better. Not only does it do that, but it helps start the Carbontech revolution of pulling carbon out of the air and making sure some of our most polluting buildings and buildings that are hardest to green become green more quickly and more efficiently than they would otherwise have been able to do. I really want to thank Chris Neidl and all of the thought leaders who have brought this idea, as well as the Low Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, and had actually worked with me previously on the tax abatement bills for solar panels and energy storage systems in New York City. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to get all of this done. And this is the next step in meeting the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that Senator Jackson and I helped pass all the way back in 2019. And this is going to go one step further in making sure we meet those goals. So I'm so happy to be here and work with all of you because it really is the activists and the thought leaders in this space who help the legislature craft these bold ideas that we can turn into action and make our state a leader for the globe in decarbonizing our built environments.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Carroll. And now I'd like to pass it over to Senator Jackson.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone on Zoom and to hear from all of the people involved in this project. In essence, this is Senate Bill 8252, and obviously Robert Carroll, my colleague, who's been very, very active, not only in education, but in environmental justice also. So let me just say one thing, that one thing you did not mention, which was huge, was that by referendum of the people of New York State, we passed the Clean Air and Clean Water referendum that guarantees every resident of our state clean air and clean water. And some people used to say to me, wait a minute, we have clean air and clean water. There's a lot of places that do not have clean air and clean water. And then who would be against people of our state having clean air and clean water? I asked you that. I don't need to answer you. You should know who the industries that are using it and polluting. Those are the individuals that are against the referendum. But the referendum passed last November by 70%. So 30% of the people did not vote in favor of it, but 70% of our state voters said yes to clean air and clean water. But this is an incentive for commercial and industrial building owners to integrate Carbontech into their system. And when I first looked at PTA, I'm so involved in education. PTA stands for Parent Teachers Association. But now, obviously, that's not what it stands for. It's a property tax abatement. And so owners and developers understand they want to try to get as much back from their investments that they can. And so this provides the opportunity for 20% of their capital cost of installation. And obviously over an 8-year period, if you spend the maximum, it's $800,000, $800,000. So if you spend, let's say, 1.5 million, and you get $800,000 back over the course of 8 years, whatever up to the $800,000, you will get a tax rebate. And so that's a good thing. And it's a good thing not only for owners and investors, it's a good thing for the people of New York City that's going to breathe fresher air and live in a healthy environment. So I am all in favor of this, understanding that this is all part of the goal and objective to improve our environment and to reach the goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Obviously, when our Governor Cuomo, signed it into law, we talked about 2050. And I remember going down to Fordham Law School, where it was signed into law. Hundreds of people were there, but there were people outside, activists, and saying, 2050, we need to try to reach these goals sooner than that. So by this incentive, the Carbon City PTA Act, property tax abatement, Carbontech in New York City would be great overall. So I'm looking forward to working with advocates and from a legislative point of view, anything we can do to improve our environment by this. And this is supposedly going to be a $1 trillion business. Well, let's get busy. Let's get busy. Let's get on it right away because it will be good for owners. It will be good for residents that live in the buildings and good for the people of New York City. And it's a win-win situation overall. And so anytime there's a win-win situation, let's do it. And so I thank the advocates and everyone involved in helping to move this forward. And Bobby, Carroll, and I are going to try to move this forward from a legislative point of view, along with the advocates pushing us and saying, go a little faster, move a little harder, work a little harder in order to get it done. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in. Obviously, this is important, and people will say, well, I don't see it. Well, you will see it by the air improving and how people can breathe now. And then also it's going to be saving our environment for all of us to live in. So thank you very much for allowing me, and I'm going to listen to some of the activists that can educate me a little bit more.
All right, thank you so much for that, Senator Jackson. Next up, we will hear from our exciting panel of Carbontech panelists. We've got a few short but sweet remarks, starting with Fred Clerc, who I will spotlight to the screen now. All right, so first off, Fred Clerc from the Carbon to Value Initiative. He is the inaugural director of the Carbon to Value Initiative, which is a Brooklyn-based carbon tech business accelerator supporting startups and venture. Fred, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sal, and it's a great pleasure to be with everyone today. So I'm Frederic. I'm the program director of C2V, the Carbon to Value Initiative, which is a 3-year program designed to catalyze the Carbontech ecosystem. And thanks to NYSERDA, who is the lead funder for this initiative, we support New York State's mission to be a global center for Carbontech and to stimulate Carbontech startup growth in the New York State region. We are run as a partnership between the Urban Future Lab out of NYU Tandon, which I work for, and is a Center for Climate Tech Innovation in New York. The second organization is Greentown Labs, the largest climate tech incubator in North America with locations in Boston and Houston. And finally, Fraunhofer USA, a global research development organization. What we do at C2V is that each year we search, evaluate, and select Carbontech startups, and we support them through fostering partnerships with members of the Carbontech Leadership Council. It's a group that we have formed, and it's composed of industry leaders and renowned experts from government, non-for-profits, and corporates. Last year, we had over 130 applicants. We selected 10 startups, and over the last 6 months of the accelerator program, we saw really rapid growth of the ecosystem, including new value chains here in the state of New York. We fostered over 70 new industry connections, and we sparked the formation of a new policy group. You know, one of the big gaps that we saw last year from discussing with the startups is that Carbontech is capital intensive, and it's going to require the installation of new equipment into existing buildings and infrastructure. And so tax abatement policy can be a really powerful tool to incentivize building owners and infrastructure operators to become early adopters of Carbontech innovations, and which in turn, will result in a virtuous cycle of like cost reduction and accelerated deployment. So we're really excited to see this kind of policy innovation getting out and being led by the New York State. For the year 2 of C2V, which just got out the call for application last week, And this year, we're super excited to have the support of Fluor, a leading engineering and construction company who will help scale and de-risk the most promising carbon innovations. You can learn more about C2V on c2vinitiative.com. And thank you very much, Sal, and everyone.
Thank you so much. So next up, we hear from Stafford Sheehan from Air Company. So Stafford is the co-founder and CTO of Brooklyn-based Air Company, who joins us from the company's lab facility in Bushwick. Welcome, Stafford.
Thanks very much, Sal. As Sal mentioned, I'm Stafford Sheehan, the Chief Technology Officer of Air Company. We're honored to be here. And speaking of CO2 utilization equipment in existing buildings, I'm calling you from our facility here in Brooklyn, New York, where we've installed a carbon dioxide conversion system that generates product alcohols from captured carbon dioxide. We develop and scale our technology that convert carbon dioxide and water into chemicals and fuels, so we can make products out of captured CO2 rather than out of fossil fuels. And the only emission from our process is oxygen. So we're pretty much like a big, really efficient tree. One example of the products that we make is Air Company's hand sanitizer. This was produced at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We donated over 15,000 bottles to hospitals in New York City during the shortage, when there was no hand sanitizer that was made from other means, corn ethanol-based means. The Carbon City PTA would be a huge help to small businesses like ours, because as you can see, we're installing carbon dioxide utilization equipment, and we're working closely together with companies such as Noya Air Capture and other capture companies to source our carbon dioxide from areas within the built environment. So thanks very much for having me here. I hope you guys enjoyed our very brief tour of the Air Company facility here in Brooklyn.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next up, we have Josh Santos, the co-founder and CEO of Noya, a San Francisco-based direct air capture startup whose building integrated technology pulls carbon directly from the air. Noya recently won the NYC Department of Building's Hack the Building Code competition for its creative proposal for urban carbon removal applications. Josh, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for having me. My name is Josh Santos, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Noya. At Noya, our mission is to accelerate the world's transition to carbon negativity. We're radically reducing both the upfront capital costs and the installation time required to perform direct air carbon capture. We're doing this by retrofitting existing pieces of industrial equipment like cooling towers and turning them into CO2 capture machines. Cooling towers are the hidden secret of fighting climate change. Across the US's 2 million cooling towers, there's the potential to annually capture over 10 billion tons of CO2 directly from the air. In New York City, there are over 6,300 cooling towers registered across the 5 boroughs, representing a 5 million ton annual CO2 capture opportunity. Our existing cooling towers have the potential to swing the pendulum significantly in addressing climate change. The city and state of New York have done a lot for climate tech already. With the addition of the property tax abatement bill introduced in the New York Assembly and State Senate, New York City has the chance to become the epicenter of the carbon tech industry. For us, the property tax abatement bill will give us the chance to offset the high capital expenses required to deploy our carbon capture technology onto New York rooftops, while helping our commercial landlord partners meet their internal climate goals in a high quality way. With the property tax abatement bill in place, New York will become the leading city for carbon technology companies like Noya and the other panelists here. Thank you all for the chance to speak, and a special thank you to Assemblymember Carroll and State Senator Jackson for your leadership here.
Thanks so much, Josh. So next up, we are going to hear from Bob Wilson. And Bob Wilson is the VP of Commercialization for Air Capture, also a Bay Area-based DAC startup with innovative technology ready to serve many different customer types in the 5 boroughs. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you and good morning. Thanks for your time this morning and for letting us spread the word about carbon dioxide removal and the Carbon City Property Tax Abatement Bill. My name is Bob Wilson. I'm co-founder and head of commercialization for Air Capture. We manufacture modular direct air capture systems, just like one you see behind me, for operation at customer sites anywhere in the world. Each unit pulls 100 metric tons per year from the atmosphere, and that number can be significantly higher when you feed it concentrated streams of CO2. For example, we can capture CO2 that is normally released from fermentation tanks and breweries. Whether we are capturing it from the air or from industrial sources, our systems can can help our customers materially reduce their scope 1 and 3 emissions. These systems can be stacked like Legos. Our business model is one where we capitalize the machines, install them at our customer sites, and then sell them the CO2 as a service. This allows us to deliver the CO2 to the customers where they need it, how they need it, and at the specified purity levels that they need. We do this using our complementary suite of compression and liquefaction technologies. In addition to an incredible amount of excitement around the product in the beverage carbonation world, we are also in discussions with companies in the indoor ag, dry ice, concrete, advanced materials, and indoor air quality spaces, with some of our first projects being planned for the New York City area. Our technology is ready to make an impact today. The bill will help air capture and many other companies in the carbon removal and carbon to value space because it offers a tremendous incentive and a lot of encouragement for property owners to install our systems, potentially cutting their costs by up to 20% from an already competitive price. Since the air capture produces CO2 on site, thereby eliminating the need for transporting the CO2, they will also help New York City pull some of the tens of thousands of trucks and their associated greenhouse gas emissions off the streets. Trucking is a messy deal. In conclusion, I would like to thank the authors and sponsors of the bill in both the Assembly and Senate for all the work they have put into this and for their support along the way. We really look forward to working with you and installing some of our systems in the city soon. Thank you for your time.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And finally, we have Chuck Rotundo, the Director of Business Development at Glenwood Mason Supply, New York City's largest producer of concrete blocks based in Brooklyn. Last year, Glenwood made Carbontech history by becoming the first producer to make circular carbon concrete right here in New York. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear us okay. We're excited to be with all of you. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Glenwood. We're a concrete block producer located in the East Flatbush section of Brooklyn. And as you just heard, we are beginning a new initiative here that involves capturing CO2. Jeff Hansen is our Director of Architectural Sales. He is spearheading the entire initiative for us. So I'm going to let him quickly walk you through what we've been doing.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to join the force here. Senator and Assemblyman, thank you for your efforts in keeping New York City clean and decarbonized. And hopefully we're helping in that area. So we're here at our plant in the middle of East Flatbush. And as you see, this is a brand new tank. We just completed this effort, a 2-year effort of using this, as you mentioned earlier, the circular economy of taking sustainable CO2 out of the buildings of New York City, bringing it here to Brooklyn and putting it into the tank here. And we have the technology with a carbon cure technology that converts the CO2 gas into a solid, and we were able to inject it into the block, which stays there for the life of the block. So again, this is a the new tank that we just put in, and we're manufacturing here at here in East Flatbush. Sorry, it's a little cold here, and we're outside, but. I, again, appreciate everybody's efforts. We partnered with these two great innovative companies in Carbon Cure and Carbon Quest that allows us to decarbonize and help our clients decarbonize and help with the carbon footprint of their buildings. Thank you, everybody, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thanks.
Thank you both so much for roughing the cold to show us that lovely equipment. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing how this legislation can help scale exciting and necessary carbon tech solutions. So finally, we will have a policy brief covering the main elements of the legislation presented by Chris Neidl, the Advocacy Director of OpenAir. Chris, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sal, for emceeing today and from the panel. I'm incredibly excited hearing everybody really give people, I think, an insight into what's possible here for Carbontech here in New York City. I also really want to thank Assemblymember Carroll, who has just been, I would say, the nationally probably the leading state legislator on carbon tech and climate tech, particularly within cities. He's been just a essential real leader in this for the last couple of years, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. And I am thrilled to have someone who, if you just do a little bit of research on Senator Jackson, if you don't know about him, and if you want to just think of impact, it's his face that should be next in the dictionary definition of that word. So it's an amazing team that we have to push this forward. So what I wanted to do just for a couple of minutes is I'm going to go ahead and give you just a very quick high-level overview of what's actually a pretty simple policy in its makeup. So what this does is Sal mentioned, and as Assemblymember Carroll mentioned as well, is it actually, while it's a very new technology that we're talking about here, we are actually building on a policy mechanism that's quite well established here in New York as a way of incentivizing environmental and clean technologies, and that's a property tax abatement. So as Senator Carroll, or as Assemblymember Carroll, I think, alluded to, and Senator Jackson did as well, as you saw from these companies, these are real companies, and they represent really a subset with an interest in New York of a much larger, rapidly evolving sector, a potentially future $1 trillion sector. And New York, because of the leadership of NYSERDA, of Governor Hochul, we're taking a lead and taking important steps to really capture the mantle as the carbon tech capital. Some of you may have seen this article in the New York Times Sunday Magazine over the summer. And this phenomenon or these developments have been reported on in multiple outlets. And so what we're excited about is how do we actually make these happen in the urban environment, particularly in New York, to not only create economic opportunity, but solve our emissions problems. So when we talk about carbon tech, there's sort of three buckets really that are relevant here for this policy. These are technologies that pull carbon out of the air, like Noya and air capture, as well as several others. Companies and technologies that utilize carbon dioxide. Air Company is one that you just heard from, as well as what Glenwood Mason is doing right now, is taking carbon dioxide and making it an ingredient in concrete, locking it away forever in concrete blocks, the sort of perfect circular carbon application, as well as technologies within buildings that prevent carbon from going up into the air. So the carbon that was used in the Glenwood concrete is captured at a facility in Midtown Manhattan using Carbon Quest technology, preventing that carbon dioxide from going up into the air. So these are the sort of buckets that we're talking about when we're talking about the kind of carbon tech that would be incentivized through this policy. And again, carbon tech is a very rapidly evolving field. The companies that you saw today are, again, ones that have a New York footprint or plan to. But every day, if you follow this, there's new companies and startups that are coming to market. So let's make sure that they come to New York State. A key part, in addition to the work that Fred is doing, and we also have a new incubator that's being launched at Columbia University, thanks to Governor Hochul's leadership. In addition to those efforts to try to cultivate and support companies on the supply side, what really helps is to create demand locally so that those companies can actually have local customers. That's what's going to help not only get those systems into buildings in New York, but it's also going to help bring those companies and the jobs and the economic value to our city as well. So what we do is this is a straightforward property tax abatement, again, very similar to earlier policies that Assemblymember Carroll, that's where we first partnered, is very acquainted with. We do it already for solar. We've been doing it for about almost 20 years. It's been key. I come from a solar background, a key ingredient from really creating a market for solar in New York. Assemblymember Carroll went and passed a battery property tax abatement, which is an essential real piece actually of the electrification of our grid and the achievement of our own local city climate goals, and also for green roofs as well. So we're taking that same idea is giving a tax credit for building owners to help defray some of the cost of installation and operation of these units. And this, again, is very similar in structure to those other PTAs. This is a 20% property tax abatement for the total installed cost of systems placed in buildings. It caps out at $100,000 a year. It can only be taken once as a PTA, but we split it up over a 4-year period, that 20%. But again, it's capped for particularly large systems that have a application in larger industrial sites. That's extended to an 8-year period in a maximum $800,000 abatement over that 8-year period. This would be eligible for systems that were placed in service for January 1st of this year. So it would be retroactive for that. So hopefully that is clear. Again, we shared a resource guide for everybody by email, and I dropped it in the links. So you have links to the policy brief, as well as to the bill, as well as to all of our speakers. But we'll pause right now and we'll go ahead and take some Q&A using the Q&A panel that is in the Zoom. And then Sal will moderate that and our panel will answer. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Chris. So to kick things off for the Q&A, we have a question from Seth. So to get a sense of the possible impact of this legislation could have, what might the carbon reduction be if, say, 1% of property owners used this legislation to its maximum on an annual basis?
Well, I can start with one, I think, important way to think about this is you even just saw from our panel, there's a range of different technologies that fall into those three buckets. So it's difficult to come up with a precise number for 1% of buildings because we're talking about many different types of applications and many different types of buildings. So you could have a direct air capture unit installed at a commercial building that's relatively small or at a brewery. You could also have carbon capture technologies or carbon utilization technologies at more industrial facilities that have high heat. So if we can have a follow-up conversation, I'd love to go into some of the details with you on that. I'm going to put my email in the chat here, Seth, and we can kind of speak through the details of these different use cases.
Awesome. So next up, how exactly does the verification process work? Since, we have certain guardrails, we have certain limitations, and we also, of course, want to make sure that the technologies that are getting this abatement are wholly beneficial in all senses. So how does that verification process work?
Why don't we ask if any of our panel here, again, a key thing here is that we want to make sure that we do a life cycle analysis. That's a condition of acceptance for eligible technologies. So technologies that have a quantifiable third-party verifiable way of assessing impact are selected for. And one of the great things about Carbontech is you can meter the removal of carbon dioxide and the utilization of it almost in real time. So it's actually quite easy to track. But I'm wondering if Josh or Chuck or staff, or if any of you guys have any insights you can add on your own sort of life cycle environmental impact assessment.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris. For the technology that we're developing, we are very careful to measure not just the amount of CO2 that we're able to draw directly out of the atmosphere, which is a key component of our carbon capture technology, but also how much carbon we generate in the process of both running and building our process. As we all know, it requires some emission of carbon dioxide today, hopefully not in the future, to make things like steel and other types of building materials to assemble industrial processes like ours. And so we measure every single one of those potential impacts and compare it against the amount of CO2 that we're actually able to capture. We have done a good job of designing our process so far because it's incredibly carbon negative and we're capturing much more CO2 out of the atmosphere than we are actually emitting. And one of the key priorities we will always have in mind is how to make that even more carbon negative. So verification for us looks very much like comparing what goes into the process from a carbon perspective and what comes out of the process from a carbon perspective, and ensuring that that balance is always tipped in one direction.
I can jump in to add to that as well. There are ISO standards for new environmental technologies, including new carbon dioxide reduction technologies. ISO 14034 is the typical ISO standard used for to assess carbon dioxide utilization or capture technologies. So there are already well-established standards out there that can tell you what your utilization efficiency is, whether or not at the end your product is carbon negative, that we use at Air Company, that several others use as well. And those ISO standards not only apply to things in the US, they're international.
Go ahead, Bob. I think you had wanted to weigh in as well.
Yeah, everything everyone said so far is spot on. The other thing I would add is in some cases, what we're doing is we're offsetting an industrial gas that would normally be utilized. And a lot of times with those industrial gases, you may see, say on average, between 10 and 4 metric tons of CO2 that escape into the atmosphere for every 1 ton that's delivered to the facility. Sometimes that number can go as high as 10 metric tons. So a huge scope 3 emission reduction. And an additional benefit to that is a lot of times, and probably what you see mostly in New York City, is coming from refineries or some other industrial source. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to establish those numbers, but it's important and it's highly impactful as well.
Chuck, did you have something to add?
Just that, we have taken the step of having an environmental product declaration created for the mixed designs for our block here. So that does add a metric to it. I also just wanted to add to the last topic you were talking about. We produce anywhere from 6 to 10 million block per year, and we are only producing CO2 block upon request right now. But for about every 30 to 33 block that we produce, we remove 1 pound of CO2 from the atmosphere. And so if you extrapolate those numbers, we do think it could have an impact. The last thing I would add is that we are not supplying every block or every building in New York City. So, it has to be a group effort from where we sit. So we think we're doing, just one small part to help here, but there's new technologies out there and we are exploring those each and every day. And that's what I wanted to add. It's tough to add metrics like Chris said, because there's so many buildings, but those are the metrics that we use right now.
Yeah, great point. Big change is made up of lots of individual little actions. So love that you added that in. So next up, we have a question about barriers. So obviously our legislation is to address the cost barrier, but are there any other types of barriers beyond cost for the implementation of these types of technologies? Do we want to have someone from our Carbontech panel jump in there?
Happy to jump in on that one. As somebody who makes products that we sell from carbon dioxide, the answer to that question is that it's completely cost. The reason why we use fossil fuels is because they're cheap. If it were cheaper to take carbon dioxide out of the air and not use fossil fuels, we wouldn't have this fossil fuel problem because we go for the most economically favorable outcome, like as a group, maybe not individually. But I would say, yeah, the largest barrier for sure is cost. There are other barriers that are smaller. I think regulatory awareness is a barrier that as well. However, cost is by far and away the biggest barrier by a long shot.
Right. And if I could just add to staff is, one of the goals of the bill here, we're talking about immediate emissions reductions. We're talking about building a carbon tech sector in New York. But as we've seen with solar, and as we've seen with batteries, prices come down as you get the products out into the world. That's both the hard cost of the technology and the cost of installing these. So a bill like this is going to start ramping up demand, and you're going to start seeing costs come down as a result of this policy. So that's a really, really key goal that we want to emphasize.
Yeah, and to add maybe another layer of nuance onto that, there's not just the cost of deployment, but there's the cost of ensuring that there is a market for the product in which you're selling. And I think New York State has done a great job of solving that problem as well, for at least the direct air capture side of things, with the recently announced carbon removal procurement bill that's currently at state legislature, ensuring that we have not just support on bringing our cost of production down, but a market to provide our carbon removal as a service into, are both incredibly critical for us to be able to continue to deploy technologies and drive those costs down our cost curve. So cost is the key barrier. And there are many factors of what costs look like. A part of it is capital costs, which the property tax abatement bill works on. A second part of that is ensuring that there is someone to provide the service that we offer to, and the state is working on that as well.
Great. Bob, you want to jump in?
Sure. I would add and build on that. Again, the other panelists are doing a fantastic job on laying this out. We currently we tell people that essentially it's cheaper to mine carbon from the air than it is to mine it from the ground. So we've gotten to that point from a cost perspective that it should be coming from the air versus going and finding it in the ground. But one of the biggest problems we have right now, as we're a nascent industry, is getting access to capital to be able to project finance these deals and get more of them out there. So big tranches of capital, and that you can get from the loan office and other places, but you're in a big, you need like 100, they're going to give you $100 million. So it's kind of this like early stage level where we're asking for 20 million to get more systems out there. So that's sort of the limiting factor for air capture right now.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at time. We do have one last question that is being answered, typed in the Q&A function. But would either of our sponsors or Chris like to say a final word before we wrap up?
Yeah, we are at time. This is fantastic. Hopefully this has been a useful sort of overview of the policy and again, the reality of this sector. And if we move on this with policies like this, New York City will become Carbon City globally. We already have a lead. I would like to give an opportunity, a bit too busy people, so we don't need to, but if Senator Jackson or Assemblymember Carroll wanted to have any final word before we sign off, you're welcome to have the floor.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for putting this panel and forum together because as I said, when I opened up, when I saw PTA, that reminded me of Parent Teachers Conference. But clearly, I know what it means when it comes to the environment and the property tax abatement for people that are involved in this industry that's going to make our earth a better place for all of us to live. And also to help, especially New York City and New York State, with the governor on board and trying to move forward with climate justice and the timeframes. This is a win-win situation. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be educated from all of you about what you're doing and how you're improving the environment and reducing the costs also so that people can follow your lead. Thank you. Bobby,
I just want to say, thank you, Senator Jackson. I am on the move. I have to make it to the Assembly Chamber, but I just want to thank Senator Jackson, Chris Neidl, the entire Open Air Collective, and all the leaders in industry who are making this possible. Hopefully our efforts in Albany will make it a little bit easier for you to make our planet a better place. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, both Senator Jackson and Assemblymember Carroll. Thank our panel. Thank our excellent lead advocate, Sal, for emceeing. And I see if there's, again, any additional questions that you have, all of the speakers today, their emails have been included in the resource guide. So we encourage you, that's the whole purpose of today, to continue the conversation with Open Air, with our sponsors, and with our panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Greatly appreciate it.